It's 00:30 hours, June 6, 1944, and Major Werner Plusket stands alone in his concrete bunker high above Omaha Beach. He commands the 352nd Infantry Division's coastal artillery, and for months he has stared at this same empty horizon. Tonight something feels different. His orders are clear. If the Allies come, his guns must stop them on the beach. If they break through here, the road to Paris lies open. At 01:00 hours, the phone rings. It's his regimental commander. He scans the darkness again, nothing but waves and fog. He hangs up and returns to the scope. His crews man the 155 guns in their reinforced positions, ammunition stacked and ready. The naval mines stretch across the beach below, the obstacles bristle from the sand. Everything is prepared, but the waiting gnaws at him. Then at 2:00 a.m. he hears it, a low mechanical growl rolling across the water, aircraft engines, hundreds of them. The sound grows into a roar. Plusket rushes to the observation slit. The sky to the north erupts in streaks of light. Parachutes bloom like white flowers against the darkness, thousands of them. Alarm. His artillery crews scramble to their guns. The phone rings again. His gunners train their pieces inland, but the order is absolute. The beach, always the beach. But the paratroopers are landing behind them, cutting roads, seizing bridges. The invasion is already past his guns. Dawn begins to break at 05:30. A pale gray light spreads across the water. Plusket returns to his scope, scanning the horizon. His heart stops. Ships. Not dozens, not hundreds, thousands. The entire horizon from left to right, as far as he can see, is covered in ships. Battleships, cruisers, destroyers, transports, an armada beyond comprehension. They sit in neat rows, dark silhouettes against the lightning sky, stretching to infinity. His hands shake as he reaches for the phone. Static crackles. His commander's voice is tight. Before the response comes, the world explodes. The first salvos from the Allied naval guns tear across the sky like freight trains. The sound arrives a split second before the shells. They slam into the bluffs around him with earth-shattering force. Concrete dust fills his bunker. The walls shudder. Fire, fire. His guns roar to life. The 155 pieces bark, sending shells arcing toward the distant fleet. But the Allied fire is overwhelming. For every shot he sends, 50 come back. The German positions erupt in fountains of dirt, steel, and shattered concrete. At 6:30 a.m., landing craft appear, hundreds of them churning forward in waves. They're heading straight for Omaha Beach, straight for his sector. Fire, his battery commanders acknowledge. The German guns shift, tracking the approaching boats. At 2,000 meters, they open fire. Shells splash around the craft. One takes a direct hit and disintegrates in a ball of orange flame. But there are too many. For every craft destroyed, 10 more push forward. The landing craft hit the obstacles. Some explode on mines, others grind to a halt on the steel hedgehogs. The ramps drop. American soldiers pour out into chest-deep water. The MG-42 positions dug into the bluffs open fire. The distinctive ripping sound of German machine guns echoes across the beach. Tracer lines rake the waterline, forcing the first wave to scatter and dive for cover. The surf churns with chaos, yet they keep coming. More landing craft grind onto the sand. Tanks push forward, some bog down immediately, others crawl toward the shingle. Engineers sprint with charges, trying to cut lanes through the obstacles. From Plusket's guns, heavy shells slam into the beach, blasting sand and debris skyward and shredding equipment in an instant. A naval shell finds one of his artillery pieces and silences the position in a single strike. The Americans are pinned down behind the seawall and shingle. The waterline is choked with wreckage and damaged vehicles burn along the beach. It looks hopeless, but the landing craft keep coming wave after wave, spilling fresh troops onto the open sand. At 7:30, he thinks to himself, how many shells remaining? They've been firing for an hour. At this rate, they'll be out in 30 minutes. He calls regiment again. The Allied guns adjust. The pattern changes, less noise, more intent. Spotters are guiding the fire, feeding coordinates from the beach and the air. Impacts march up the bluff, closing in with frightening accuracy. Then the bunker takes a direct shock. The scope fractures, the view disappears. Plusket hits the floor hard. He lifts his head and sees smoke seeping through a new crack in the wall. The concrete is beginning to give. 2 guns left with fewer than 40 shells remaining. By 8:00, the Americans begin to advance. Small groups break from the seawall and move up through the draws along the bluff. Defensive fire forces several to drop and take cover, but others reach the low ground and keep pushing. They work with grenades and satchel charges to disable each strong point they encounter. The radio crackles, then drops into silence. Outside, the air pulses with repeated impacts, each one closer than the last. A messenger rushes into the shelter. There's no withdrawal. The roads are cut and the escape routes are held. His men can only fall back into an ever smaller section of the line. At 8:45, his last 2 positions fall silent. They are out of ammunition. Plusket stares toward the shoreline. It's filled with movement now, huge numbers pressing forward and spreading inward. Heavy vehicles crawl up the slopes. Gaps have opened where the barriers used to be. The ground he was meant to hold has become a foothold for the advance. The invasion has succeeded. At the base of the bluff, medics move urgently through the chaos. German and Americans lie side by side. The scale of the arrival is immense, vehicles and supplies in a continuous stream pushing inland without pause. The Atlantic Wall has failed. His account of watching the Allied fleet appear at dawn became one of the most famous German perspectives of the invasion. The 352nd Infantry Division suffered catastrophic casualties defending Omaha Beach, with over 1,200 men killed, wounded, or captured in the first 12 hours. Despite inflicting heavy losses on the American forces, the German defenders were overwhelmed by the scale and firepower of the Allied assault. Plusket survived the war, and his testimony was featured in Cornelius Ryan's book, The Longest Day. He maintained until his death that the sight of the Allied armada at dawn was the moment he knew Germany had lost the war. The defense of Omaha Beach was Germany's most successful resistance on D-Day, but it wasn't enough. For those who survived the onslaught on the bluffs, the aftermath was a landscape of surreal devastation. As the sun climbed higher over Normandy, the smoke from burning Tiger tanks and landing craft mingled with the sea mist, creating a thick, metallic haze that hung over the 352nd's former strongpoints. The rhythmic thunder of the naval guns had shifted further inland, targeting crossroads and bridges, leaving the beach in a state of eerie, localized chaos, punctuated only by the cries of the wounded and the sharp crack of distant sniper fire. The collapse of Major Plusket's sector was a microcosm of the larger failure along the coast. By midday, the high command at St. Lo was still receiving conflicting reports. Some officers believed the landings were merely a feint, while others, like Plusket, already understood the gravity of the steel tide. The German reserve units, including the 21st Panzer Division, were entangled in bureaucratic delays and disrupted communications, unable to launch the decisive counterattack that Rommel had always insisted was necessary within the first 24 hours. As the Americans established their beachhead, the logistics of the invasion began to manifest in their full, terrifying glory. The Mulberry Harbors, massive, artificial ports towed across the English Channel, began to take shape, ensuring that the initial foothold would rapidly grow into a permanent gateway. For the German soldiers retreating through the hedgerows of the bocage, the war had changed fundamentally. They were no longer defenders of a fortress. They were now participants in a fighting retreat against an enemy that possessed seemingly infinite resources. The story of the 352nd Infantry Division remains a testament to the ferocity of the defense, but Plusket's haunting realization at the observation slit remains the defining image of that morning. It was the moment the myth of the impenetrable fortress Europe vanished, replaced by the reality of a continent being reclaimed, one bloody yard of sand at a time. Beyond the bluffs of Omaha, the reality of the breakthrough began to ripple through the German command structure. While the lower-ranking soldiers of the 352nd fought for their lives in the crumbling trenches, the high command at the Oberkommando der Wehrmacht remained in a state of paralysis. Because the weather had been so poor, many senior officers, including Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, were away from the front. The lack of immediate leadership meant that the crucial Panzer reserves, which could have potentially pushed the Americans back into the sea, remained stationary, waiting for an authorization from Hitler that would not come for hours. By noon, the impenetrable Atlantic Wall was no longer a wall, but a series of isolated islands of resistance. The Americans had successfully moved beyond the shingle and were now entering the nightmare of the French bocage, a dense network of ancient hedgerows, narrow sunken lanes, and stone farmhouses. This terrain favored the defender, but the sheer volume of Allied air superiority meant that any German movement during the day was met with a rain of fire from P-47 thunderbolts and typhoons. The sky, much like the sea at dawn, now belonged to the Allies. The tactical success at Omaha Beach came at a staggering cost, but it secured the link between the British landings at Gold Beach and the American landings at Utah. As the sun began to set on June 6th, the quiet villages of the Calvados region were filled with the sound of grinding tank treads and the rhythmic marching of thousands of infantrymen. The German dream of a quick victory in the West had evaporated. In its place was the grueling reality of a war of attrition that would eventually lead the Allied armies all the way to the heart of Berlin. The legacy of Major Pluscat's observation is a reminder of the psychological weight of the invasion. It wasn't just the shells or the soldiers that broke the German defense. It was the realization that the scale of the Allied effort was beyond anything the defenders had been led to believe possible. The longest day was ending, but for the world, the liberation of Europe had only just begun. In the days following the breakthrough, the struggle shifted from the blood-stained sands to the claustrophobic labyrinth of the Normandy interior. The German retreat was not a rout, but a desperate, methodical withdrawal into the hedgerows. Each field became a fortress, and every sunken road a killing zone. The 352nd Infantry Division, though shattered, integrated with arriving reinforcements to form a jagged line of resistance that utilized the terrain to its maximum advantage. The Allied advance slowed to a crawl. The Shermans, designed for open maneuvers, found themselves vulnerable in the tight corridors of the bocage, where German Panzerfaust teams could strike from concealment at point-blank range. This was the War of the Hedgerows, a grueling contest where progress was measured in yards rather than miles. For the soldiers on the ground, the grand strategy of the invasion was lost in the smoke of small-unit actions, where the capture of a single stone barn could cost dozens of lives. As June turned to July, the pressure on the German front grew unsustainable. While the defenders were forced to cannibalize units to plug gaps, the Allied logistical machine was pouring men and material through the now secure ports. The sheer weight of artillery fire, now supplemented by heavy bombers used in a tactical role, began to pulverize the German lines. The iron ring around the beachhead was stretching to its breaking point. The culmination of this pressure led to Operation Cobra, the decisive Allied breakout. Using a massive carpet-bombing campaign to shatter the German crust near Saint-Lô, General Patton's Third Army finally burst into the open plains of France. The static warfare of the bluffs and the slow grind of the hedgerows gave way to a war of rapid movement. For the remnants of the German forces in Normandy, the threat was no longer just the ships on the horizon, but the very real danger of total encirclement in the looming Falaise pocket. The narrowing gap at Falaise became a graveyard for the German 7th Army. As the Allied pincer movement closed from the north and south, the roads leading eastward were choked with the charred remains of the Wehrmacht's once mighty mechanized divisions. Major Pluscat's earlier premonition of the road to Paris lying open had become a terrifying reality. The German soldiers who had survived the bluffs of Omaha now found themselves in a desperate race against time, fleeing through a corridor of fire while Allied Typhoon fighter bombers preyed upon anything that moved. Inside the pocket, the discipline of the German army began to fray under the relentless pressure of total war. Horses, wagons, and heavy tanks were abandoned in the mud as the Allied artillery coordinates closed in. By the time the gap was finally sealed at Chambois, the landscape was unrecognizable, a twisted heap of steel and ash that marked the end of organized German resistance in Normandy. The disaster at Falaise was the strategic equivalent of a second Stalingrad, breaking the spine of the German army in the west. With the German center shattered, the race for the Seine began. The French resistance, emboldened by the Allied approach, rose up in the streets of Paris, turning the City of Light into a battlefield of snipers and barricades. The German commander of Greater Paris, General von Choltitz, faced a direct order from the Führer to leave the city in ruins, to burn its bridges and monuments before the Allies could arrive. But as the 2nd French Armored Division and the U.S. 4th Infantry Division reached the outskirts, the momentum of the liberation proved unstoppable. The liberation of Paris on August 25th was not just a symbolic victory, it was a logistical and psychological turning point. The sight of Allied troops marching down the Champs-Élysées signaled to the occupied nations of Europe that the end was in sight. For the German survivors retreating toward the Siegfried Line, the empty horizon Plusquet had watched in June was now a distant memory, replaced by the constant, looming presence of an Allied army that was now knocking on the very gates of the Reich.